January is the month in which most gardeners waste time. While your neighbors are leafing through seed catalogs and waiting for spring, you could start growing 18 crops. These crops will feed your family months before anyone else's crops even sprout. The difference between planting now and waiting until March or April is more than just a few weeks of early harvest. It is the difference between abundance and scarcity, between food security and dependence on stores. In stores, one tomato costs about $1 or $2. There are 18 of the most productive crops you should plant in January. If you are too late, the critical window of opportunity will close forever. Every week of delay is a week of wasted growth time. Now you will know exactly what to plant and why it will change everything. Onions planted from seed in January will be ready for harvest in late summer and will last throughout the winter. This will give you a year's supply of one of the most important cooking ingredients from one planting. Most people plant onion sets in the spring because it's easier, but starting from seed in January produces larger bulbs. Such bulbs last longer and are several times cheaper than purchased ones. Sow onion seeds indoors in seed trays filled with a good quality potting mix. Maintain the temperature around 18 degrees Celsius near a sunny window. When the seedlings develop a second leaf about 1.5 centimeters long, transplant them into another tray. The distance between plants should be 5 centimeters. Then gradually harden them off and transplant them outside in early spring as soon as the soil is workable. Long-day onion varieties require 14 to 16 hours of daylight to form large bulbs. Medieval households relied on stored onions during the winter food shortage months when fresh vegetables were scarce. Leeks started in January will grow as thick as your arm by autumn and will last in the garden all winter. It provides fresh vegetables when little else is available, making it one of the most valuable crops for year-round self-sufficiency. Unlike onions, which need to be harvested and stored, leeks simply wait in the ground until you need them. Frost and snow do not affect it at all. The process is identical to growing onions. Sow the seeds indoors in trays, keep warm and humid. Transplant when they are large enough to handle and plant outside when the weather permits. Leeks require deeper planting than onions, because you are growing them for their long white stem. When you replant it, make a deep hole with a stake. Lower the leek seedling and simply water, without filling the hole with soil. Ancient Egypt and Wales used leeks as a symbol of strength at the Battle of Crécy in 1346. These first two crops, onions and leeks, form the basis of food security. They keep for months, and you use them in almost every meal. That's why starting to grow them now, rather than waiting until spring, can mean the difference between running out in February and having your own supplies until the next harvest. Onions and leeks do not contribute calories but important flavor compounds that enhance food satisfaction. This reduces dependence on processed foods and improves the overall nutrition of the family. The average family spends more than $500 annually on vegetables according to statistics. Growing your own onion crops can reduce these costs by 30% in the first year. Allium contains compounds that naturally preserve other foods, extending the shelf life of homemade preparations. These two cultures transform winter cooking from a dull repetition of canned food into a varied meal with rich flavors. The last week of January is the ideal time to plant tomatoes indoors if you have a greenhouse or sunny window. Tomatoes need 8 to 10 weeks of indoor growing before they can be transplanted outside after the last frost. By starting them now, you'll get the fruit in early summer instead of waiting until August when everyone else's tomatoes finally ripen. Sow the seeds in small pots or seed trays filled with seed-starting mixture. Maintain a temperature of 21 degrees Celsius during the day and 18 degrees at night. Provide as much light as possible, because lack of light creates elongated seedlings. When the seedlings develop their first true leaves, transplant them into separate 10-centimeter pots. Then gradually harden them off in late spring before moving them to the garden or greenhouse, where they will bear fruit for months. The Royal Horticultural Society has confirmed the exact germination temperature range for tomatoes. Victorian England pioneered greenhouse tomato cultivation, linking modern practices with historical innovations. Tomato prices have risen by more than 30% in some regions, according to the Food Organization. Cauliflower planted in January will be ready for harvest in early summer, filling the gap between spring greens and summer vegetables. Although cauliflower has a reputation for being a difficult crop to grow, the secret is simply timing your planting indoors and keeping it growing. Any stop in its development will result in the formation of tiny premature heads instead of the large, dense inflorescences that you want. This phenomenon is called buttoning and has been attributed to plant stress responses studied in horticultural scientific journals. Sow seeds in bowls or seed boxes indoors and maintain warmth and humidity. Replant them in greenhouses or under mini greenhouses as they thicken. Continue to sow new seeds every few weeks to ensure you have a continuous harvest rather than an oversupply at once. Then transplant them outside when they are large enough to handle, spacing them about 45 centimeters apart in rich, well-fertilized soil. The biological explanation for button formation is related to temperature fluctuations and nutrient deficiencies during critical growth phases. Winter lettuce varieties sown in January in a greenhouse or unheated greenhouse will provide fresh salads in early spring. At this time, salad in stores costs about $2. Unlike summer lettuce, which thrives in hot weather, winter varieties are bred to tolerate cold. They'll grow slowly but steadily through the darkest months, ready for harvest just when your body is craving fresh greens. This occurs after a winter of stored root vegetables and canned vegetables. Sow the seeds in thin rows or broadcast them throughout the bed. Barely cover them with soil because lettuce needs light to germinate according to photoperiodic sensitivity studies. Keep the soil moist but not soggy, and thin the seedlings to a distance of about 15 centimeters. Or remove them as new greens and let the remaining plants fill in the gaps. The varieties, Winter Density and Arctic King, show particular cold resistance in northern climatic conditions. Photoperiodic studies show that short daylight hours slow down bolting in properly selected varieties. Celery started in January will be ready for harvest in late summer and fall. Although it is considered a difficult crop, the real secret is simply providing a long, growing season with constant moisture and rich soil. Celery is essentially a bog plant that requires more water and fertilizer than almost any other garden vegetable. Its origin as a marsh plant in the Mediterranean basin explains its high humidity requirements. Sow the seeds indoors in late January, barely covering them because they need light to germinate. Keep the temperature around 21 degrees and be patient because celery is notoriously slow to sprout. This takes up to 3 weeks even under ideal conditions. Then transplant the seedlings into individual pots when they are large enough to handle. Harden them off gradually and transplant them outside in late spring into trenches filled with compost and manure. Celery's high water content is 95%, which scientifically backs up watering tips. The Mediterranean origin of the crop links modern cultivation methods with the ancient traditions of swamp farming. Here's why these 6 cultures are more important than you think. They represent the difference between buying vegetables year-round and growing your own food supply. Onions, leeks, lettuce, tomatoes, cauliflower, and celery cover your basic needs from spring to winter if you start them now, rather than wait. These 6 crops can supply up to 70% of a household's vegetable needs by volume, according to studies of intensive gardening. Statistics show that the average family can save over $300 annually by growing these staple crops themselves. The temporary advantage of January sowing gives a 2 to 3 month head start over ordinary gardeners. The combination of these crops ensures a continuous supply of fresh vegetables from May to March of the following year. The nutritional value of homemade vegetables exceeds store-bought counterparts by an average of 40% due to freshness and varietal characteristics. But the following crops require even more planning and patience for maximum benefit. Peppers need an even longer growing season than tomatoes, so January is the ideal time to plant them indoors. Peppers are slow to germinate, slow to grow, and slow to bear fruit. But if you give them the time they need, they will produce abundantly from midsummer until the first frost, providing fresh peppers for salads and cooking. Plus, it will be enough for drying or freezing for the winter. Sow the seeds in small pots or cassettes. Maintain a very warm temperature of 24 to 27 degrees Celsius because peppers are tropical plants. They will not germinate in cool soil at all. Provide maximum light after germination and transplant into larger pots as they grow. Don't rush to take them outside because peppers are extremely sensitive to cold and will be depressed for weeks if exposed to temperatures below 10 degrees. The domestication of peppers occurred in Mesoamerica about 8,000 years ago, adding historical depth to modern cultivation. The capsaicin in peppers evolved as a defense mechanism against mammals, but attracts birds to disperse the seeds. Eggplant has the same requirements as peppers, but is even more heat-loving and slow-growing. This means that starting it in January gives the best chance of getting a good harvest before the fall frosts arrive. Although eggplants are not as productive as tomatoes or peppers, a few plants will provide enough fruit for ratatouille, baba ganoush, and grilled vegetables all summer long. The process is identical to peppers. Sow in pots, keep the temperature very warm, provide maximum light. Replant into larger containers as needed and wait until the soil is completely warm before transplanting outside. Then mulch generously and water constantly because eggplant needs consistent moisture to produce fruit. Eggplant originates from India and China, where it was grown more than 4,000 years ago. In Europe, it was once called the mad apple due to misconceptions about its effects on the mind, adding to the intrigue of this culture. Modern research shows high levels of antioxidants in the dark skin of eggplant. Now this is where it gets interesting, because the following 4 crops separate the serious gardeners from the hobbyists. These are crops that tolerate cold, fix their own nitrogen, and produce crops when nothing else grows. Symbiosis with the bacteria. Rhizobium converts atmospheric nitrogen into a form available to plants through root nodules. This process can provide up to 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, according to agronomic studies. Legumes represent the basis of sustainable agriculture, which was practiced in ancient Rome. Behavioral psychology, studied by Richard Thaler, shows how people delay action despite long-term benefits. This explains why most gardeners ignore January planting in favor of a more convenient spring schedule. Nitrogen fixation occurs only with the correct soil pH and the presence of microdoses of molybdenum. Understanding this science transforms gardening from a hobby into a smart food production system. Beans, also called fava beans, are one of the hardiest vegetables you can grow. They can survive in temperatures down to -12 degrees Celsius, meaning that in mild climates they can be sown directly outside in January. In colder areas, you can start them in pots in a greenhouse and transplant them in early spring, yielding a harvest of fresh beans in late spring or early summer. Sow the seeds 5 centimeters deep and 15 centimeters apart in double rows, or start them in deep pots to avoid disturbing the roots when transplanting. Beans fix their own nitrogen from the air through bacteria in their root nodules, which means they actually improve your soil as they grow. After harvesting the beans, cut the plants at ground level and leave the nitrogen-rich roots in the soil to feed the next crop. The use of beans in Roman agriculture is documented in the writings of Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD. Nitrogen fixation can reach 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare under optimal growing conditions. Early peas sown in January under shelters or in greenhouses will be ready for harvest in late spring. There is nothing quite like the taste of fresh peas picked straight from the vine. So sweet and delicate that they rarely make it from the garden to the kitchen. You will eat everything right at the time of picking, enjoying the first fruits of the new season. Sow the seeds 5 centimeters deep and spaced 5 centimeters apart in double rows or use the deep bed method. Scatter them at a distance of 15 centimeters throughout the garden bed. Provide climbing support because even dwarf varieties produce better crops with support. Protect against mice, which like to dig up and eat seeds, by soaking the seeds in kerosene before planting. It does not harm the plants, but mice hate the smell and avoid treated seeds. Gregor Mendel's experiments with peas in the 1860s laid the foundations of genetics as a science. Modern research shows that fresh peas lose up to 40% of their sugar within 6 hours of being picked. Spinach is incredibly cold-hardy and can be sown outside in January in mild climates or in greenhouses anywhere. It grows quickly in cool weather, providing fresh greens in early spring when your body is desperate for vitamins. After a winter of stored food and canned vegetables, fresh spinach is a real health savior. Unlike lettuce, which is mostly water, spinach is packed with iron, vitamins, and minerals. This makes it one of the most nutritious vegetables you can grow at home. Sow the seeds 1.5 centimeters deep in rows or broadcast them throughout the bed, thin to 10 centimeters apart, and harvest by cutting off the outer leaves, allowing the center to continue to grow. Or cut the entire plant 2.5 centimeters above the ground, and it will often resprout for a second harvest. The introduction of spinach to Europe occurred in the 11th century through Persia along trade routes. The iron content of spinach is 2.7 milligrams per 100 grams of fresh produce, according to the Ministry of Agriculture. Seedlings started in January can be planted outside in early spring and will provide continuous harvests from late spring until the following winter. Kale is virtually indestructible and can withstand heat, cold, poor soil, and neglect better than almost any other vegetable. It is one of the most nutritious foods on the planet, packed with vitamins A, C, and K plus calcium and antioxidants. Start seeds indoors in pots or trays. Transplant outdoors when they reach 10 to 15 centimeters in height. Space them 45 centimeters apart and harvest by cutting off the outer leaves, allowing the growing point to continue to develop. Or cut the entire plant 2.5 centimeters above the ground, and it will often resprout. Kale has exploded in popularity since 2000, thanks to health food trends and superfood marketing. The Department of Agriculture's nutrient density rankings place kale at the top of all vegetables. The vitamin K content of kale exceeds the daily value by 5 times per 100-gram serving. These 6 crops, from peppers to kale, represent the foundation of a productive garden because they cover the entire growing season. From early spring to late fall, constant harvests provide the family with fresh vegetables 12 months a year. By starting in January, you're not just gardening. You're building a food system that doesn't rely on stores. The visual harvest timeline shows continuous production from March to December with proper planning. Beans and peas produce a harvest in May to June. Spinach and kale, all year round, peppers and eggplants, from July to October. This system turns casual gardening into strategic food production. The permaculture concept includes annual vegetables as the basis of the food forest. Long-term yield planning shows a cumulative effect. Every year the garden becomes more productive. The following crops require even more strategic thinking and long-term investment of time and effort. If you didn't plant garlic in the fall, January is your last chance in a mild climate for a summer harvest. Although fall garlic produces larger bulbs, planting in January will still provide a decent harvest. Growing your own garlic means you'll have fresh bulbs that last for months and cost pennies compared to $3 a kilo for organic garlic in stores. Break the onion into individual cloves and plant them at a depth of 5 centimeters at a distance of 15 centimeters with the pointed end up. Mulch generously with straw or leaves and allow them to grow throughout the spring and early summer. Then harvest when the lower leaves turn brown and dry. Dry in a shady, ventilated place for several weeks and store in a cool, dry place where they will keep until next spring. Research on allicin and its antimicrobial properties has been published in the Journal of Nutrition, confirming the medicinal qualities of garlic. The ancient Egyptians fed garlic to the pyramid builders to keep the workers strong and healthy. Shallots are planted in the same way as garlic, but they produce clusters of small onion-like bulbs with a milder, sweeter flavor. They are ideal for cooking and store even better than onions, often lasting a full year in the right conditions. This makes them the most important crop for family self-sufficiency and food independence. Plant individual shallot bulbs in January, spacing them 15 centimeters apart. Just cover them with soil so that the tips are still visible above the surface. They will grow throughout the spring and summer, multiplying in clusters of 6 to 12 bulbs for each bulb initially planted. Then harvest when the tops die, dry like garlic, and store in a cool, dry, dark place. The origins of shallots in Central Asia and their mention in ancient Persian trade routes add to the historical richness of this culture. Persian traders valued shallots for long-term storage during months-long caravan journeys along the Silk Road. January is the ideal time to force rhubarb out for an early spring harvest by covering the established crowns with barrels or large pots. Bury them completely under a pile of manure mixed with straw. The heat from decomposing manure combined with darkness will cause rhubarb to produce tender, sweet stems weeks earlier than untreated plants. This will give you fresh fruit for pies and compotes when nothing else is available. The removed stems will be pale pink or even white instead of the usual red color, and they will be much more tender and less sour. Although forcing weakens the plant, so you shouldn't do it every year, rotating between plants means you can have rhubarb forced out every January. The famous rhubarb triangle in Yorkshire, England, where distillation techniques were industrialized in the 19th century. Victorian gardeners perfected the method of forced cultivation to supply aristocratic homes year-round. Driven rhubarb grows so quickly that you can hear the crackling of growing stems in the silence of winter greenhouses. Here's a critical insight that most gardeners miss. These last 6 crops, from garlic to asparagus, have been produced for years with minimal work, which means planting them in January isn't just this year's harvest. This is the construction of permanent food security for decades to come. The permaculture concept incorporates perennial vegetables as the foundation of a sustainable food system. Long-term returns show a cumulative effect. Each year, investing in perennials produces more food with less effort. Economic analysis shows that perennial crops pay back initial costs within 3 to 5 years. They then provide virtually free products for decades. Strategic thinking separates successful food producers from casual gardeners. Understanding the timescale turns January resolutions into lifelong investments in family food independence. January is the time to sprout seed potatoes, which means placing them in shallow boxes or egg trays. Place them in a bright, frost-free area, such as a barn or greenhouse, where they will develop short, strong shoots before planting. Sprouting gives your potatoes a few weeks' head start, resulting in earlier harvests and higher yields. This is especially important for early varieties that you want to harvest in late spring or early summer. Select certified disease-free seed potatoes and place them with the end with the most eyes facing up. Keep them in bright light, but never in direct sunlight, and keep the temperature around 10 degrees Celsius. In 6 to 8 weeks, they will develop strong green or purple shoots about 2.5 centimeters long. At this point, they are ready to be planted outside as soon as the soil is workable and frost-free. The origins of the potato in the Andes and the Irish potato famine of 1845 add dramatic historical stakes to the crop. Jerusalem artichoke, also called earthen pear, can be planted in January in mild climates and is one of the most productive and indestructible crops. It produces huge quantities of edible tubers with little or no maintenance. It is a perennial crop, which means that once planted it will come back year after year and grow so vigorously that your main problem will be keeping it from taking over the entire garden. Plant the tubers 10 centimeters deep and 30 centimeters apart, and they will grow into tall plants 2.5 to 3 meters tall. Bright yellow flowers, similar to sunflowers, appear in autumn. After the first frost kills the tops, you can dig up the tubers as needed throughout the winter. They keep in the ground better than any root cellar, staying fresh and crisp until you're ready to harvest them. The misnomer comes from the Italian girasole, which means sunflower, corrupted to Jerusalem. The high inulin content affects digestion, which adds educational and practical value to this crop. January is the traditional time to plant asparagus rhizomes. Although asparagus requires patience because it cannot be harvested for the first 2 years after planting, once established it will produce for 20 years or more with minimal care. This will give you fresh shoots every spring for decades. Asparagus sells for $5 per kilo in stores, meaning one bed of asparagus can save hundreds of dollars annually once full production is achieved. Dig a trench 20 centimeters deep and 30 centimeters wide. Create a ridge of soil mixed with compost in the center of the trench. Spread the asparagus rhizomes along the ridge with the roots hanging down the sides and cover with 2 inches of soil. As the shoots grow, gradually backfill the trench over the summer. Then mulch generously and allow the plants to grow into tall, ferny foliage that will nourish the roots for next year's harvest. Roman cultivation of asparagus is documented in the writings of Pliny, linking modern methods with ancient traditions. Current yield data shows that established beds produce up to 20 years of consistent yields. These 18 crops provide the foundation for a productive garden that will feed you from early spring until next winter. The key insight is that January is not a month of waiting, but a month of planting, because every week of delay means a week less time to grow. In gardening, time is the only resource that can never be returned. A garden of 100 square meters can produce over 300 kilograms of food annually with intensive gardening methods. Economic analysis shows savings of more than $1,000 per year for a family of 4 with complete self-sufficiency in vegetables. The nutritional value exceeds store-bought vegetables due to the freshness and variety of varieties. Strategic planning turns a casual hobby into a serious food production system. From fast-growing lettuce to 20-year-old asparagus, every crop plays a role in your year-round supply. January decisions determine the success of the entire growing season and lay the foundation for many years of food security. January is where real food security begins, not in the spring, not when the seed catalogs arrive, but when you plant while everyone else waits. Successful gardeners understand that the growing season begins in January, not spring. When you sow seeds indoors while there is snow on the ground. When you sprout potatoes in the shed while the neighbors watch TV. When you're manuring rhubarb while everyone else is looking at seed catalogs and dreaming of summer. January is the month that separates the gardeners who talk about self-sufficiency from the gardeners who actually achieve it. The cycles of agriculture reflect human decisions. Those who plan ahead reap abundance. The time metaphor shows that successful gardening is not about fighting nature, but about working in harmony with natural rhythms. The difference between dependence and independence is not measured in months, but in decisions made at critical moments in planning. January provides this critical window of opportunity that shapes the entire year.